attention today to a historic issue, which was the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, November of 1963, and the many things that are now coming to light with regard to that. There's been a lot of recently declassified information. I've had Jerome Corsi on this program to discuss this. He has a new book about called Who Killed Kennedy. And we're now joined by Barr McClellan, who has a new book coming out soon called The Verdict, which talks about how LBJ killed JFK. The book exposes the secret high-level conspiracy in Texas that led to President John F. Kennedy's death and the succession of Lyndon B. Johnson as president in 1963. Attorney Barr McClellan, my guest, a former member of LBJ's legal team, uses hundreds of newly released documents, including insider interviews, court papers, and the Warren Commission, to illuminate the maneuvers, payoffs, and power plays that revolved around the assassination of Kennedy and to expose LBJ's involvement in the murder plot. Barr, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Well, it's sure a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Barr, first of all, talk a little bit about your background and how it is that you got involved in this issue.
Well, it started out getting a law degree and being qualified to work with Johnson's law team. Graduated from law school in 1964 and went to Washington for a couple of years to pick up some experience in the big city. Came back, was hired by Ed Clark, who is at the time recognized as the most powerful man in Texas, and was the only man Johnson trusted. Anyway, we went to work with him, did a lot of cases. I had to split company with him. He wanted me to do a case involving Leon Jaworski, and there was no way I could do that. I left.
Right.
Moved to Houston, opened a law firm here, and in 1994, I was able to turn a lot of attention to what had happened with the assassination. The main step I took was to review what Warren had done, and saw the fingerprint evidence was weak. I carried it a step further and engaged a fingerprint expert who did a blind study and found a match to a fellow who had done some killing for Lyndon before. Brought this to the public's attention and have been working on it ever since. It's been a fascinating journey.
You did. Yeah. No, it's a fascinating subject, and I think that a lot of the things that have been said for many decades by people who have done legitimate research in this topic is now coming to light. I mean, it's gradually being released to the public. The fact that there's still information about the Kennedy assassination that's classified is outrageous. There's nothing that would involve that assassination that would be in any way compromising national security today. Most of the principals are now dead. That, the American people ought to know the full and unvarnished truth. Everything.
You're absolutely right on that.
We should get a complete, grasp of the history and the entire story. And, these things are often left classified as a way of preserving reputations. It's very political. I mean, I'll give you just a quick sidebar here. The Venona decryptions were released in the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union. They proved they were American decryptions of Soviet communication with members of the Roosevelt administration, and they proved that people like Alger Hiss and Harry Dexter White and a lot of other people at high levels of the Roosevelt administration were working with Stalin and were, whether they were communists or not, they were helping the Soviet Union. And if that had been released at the time, back in the late 40s, we could have avoided the whole McCarthy business and all of it, because there wouldn't have been any need for McCarthy. We would have known these people were communists. We would have had it. They would have been prosecuted and probably thrown in prison. But it wasn't released because Truman decided that it didn't look good for the Democratic Party, mainly. He wanted to be reelected. it was easier to keep the thing under wraps. And I think that the same dynamic is at play with the Kennedy assassination. It's protecting certain people. It's protecting certain reputations. And we're not going to find out about it for another, decade or 2 decades. And, it shouldn't be going on in this country. We should know the full and unvarnished truth of exactly what happened. Now, you make some startling comments here, Barr, and I want you to justify it, because what you're saying here is that Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson, basically, for lack of a better word, that he killed Kennedy. Is that right?
That cuts right to the heart of it, and when you put it all together, there's no other way to go. And what happens is everything you've said about how these things get covered up unnecessarily come to bear here. You are specifically well located to do something about it, too, being in Brookline, and, of course, that's where John Kennedy was born. What the cover-up has meant, how it works, is they protecting Lyndon Johnson every step of the way, saying we can't, compromise. We can't take down a president of the United States. The problem is John Kennedy was a president of the United States also, and to the extent they don't bring out this information, they dishonor John Kennedy. And what has happened when I brought out my information first in my first book is I heard back from the Kennedys, and the Kennedys gave me a lot of help in coming up with new information, just like you mentioned. It's there. I'm doing my best to bring it out, and there's more. And we need to get that information out there for John Kennedy.
Yeah, you bet. Now, Barr, let me ask you something. You say you've been in touch with the Kennedys after, obviously after the fact. Why didn't the Kennedy family pursue the issue a little bit more publicly, a bit more vigorously? Why didn't Robert Kennedy or Ted Kennedy? I mean, Ted Kennedy never really discussed this issue at all publicly. I mean, why not?
I think one big reason was they didn't have enough information then, because it was so well covered up by the Warren Commission. But I had contact with a woman who had dated John Jr., spent time in the Jackie's mansion there in Park Avenue in New York, and she came up with a lot of that information, and it came down to Jackie being so concerned for the safety of her children that she left the country. Remember how she married Onassis and left, and they have been scared since then. But at the same time, what Meg Azani, who was dating John Jr., could bring out was how John Jr. saw what had happened as he grew up. And, I think a son has a special attachment to a father, and he saw what had happened and chose as a quest in his life was to find who killed his father. And he started George Magazine.
Do you think that had anything to do with his mysterious accident, or?
Well,
did you connect that?
And Meg was the closest one, the lady who had been helping me, and she didn't want to go there. I don't go there because I just don't have enough information. And part of my experience has been that to really find answers, you need insiders who can bring out small things or big things and piece it all together and make a total case, which is what I've been able to do. But she didn't say that. She did say that when he quit George, he stopped it. It was because he wanted to run for president. So, lots of questions.
Right. Well, we'll leave that there. And also, there's another sidebar, which was that George Magazine, I think the last issue before he died, they ran a pretty major piece on this Professor Carol Quigley, who is the author of a book called Tragedy and Hope. And it kind of is an expose of the whole rotten Eastern Seaboard establishment. I mean, it's one of these books that was suppressed. And I'm not saying that there's a connection there, but it's interesting that Kennedy was kind of a truth teller. I mean, he didn't worry about, he seemed to just go forward and want to get to truths in a way that you don't see a lot of people do. And, maybe he was digging into the Kennedy assassination. That wouldn't surprise me at all, based upon just what we've seen of his public work. But getting back to the issue of the Kennedy assassination itself, I recently read a book by Roger Stone. I don't know if you know who he is. He was
yes.
with the Nixon. He was with the Nixon administration, and he says basically he doesn't point a direct finger at LBJ, but he brings out some interesting things in that book about the fact that what LBJ was doing the night before the assassination in Dallas. He was having this party with this oil man by the name of Clint Murchison, and that there were comments made at that party that were witnessed by people where he said, we're going to get this job done tomorrow and everything's going to be changed. And that Kennedy did indicate that he was going to be dropping Johnson from the ticket. In fact, the very day of the assassination, there was a special Bulldog edition of the Boston Herald or the Boston Globe, which said Kennedy drops Johnson. And there was some rather dark, macabre humor over this, where people said, well, I guess looks like Johnson dropped Kennedy.
That's
and that Johnson
dark,
was... Yeah, and then also Lyndon Johnson had some legal problems. He had the Bobby Baker scandal. There were some other things that were kind of nipping at his heels, and that he very well could have ended up in jail.
Exactly.
And so he had motivation. He had motivation to do this. I mean, he was saving his own neck, but also he was obviously advancing his overwhelming and overpowering ambition to be president of the United States. So talk a little bit about that. I mean, I don't think anyone would question that Johnson had a motive and that Johnson, more than anyone other human being, gained from the murder of Kennedy.
That's the point that needs to be investigated further and exposed, and I've done what I can. He started out having problems with his father, who was a failure, and his mother was in tears, and he made his mind up then, so the experts tell us, that he was going to be a complete success. Well, he started out finding out he could steal elections way back when. He kept doing it. He found out there was no penalty to be imposed because he was a big guy, big shot. And the first murder we know about was Sam Smithwick, who was going to reveal what happened in one of the stolen elections. He was found to be strangled in his prison cell. That was the verdict, strangulation. I don't know how you strangle yourself, but that was what they tried to come up with.
Somehow, something had to give. Someone had to give a little hint. All right, we'll be right back. My guest is Barr McClellan. The verdict is the book. We'll be right back. Thank you very much. Barr McClellan's my guest. He's a former member of LBJ's legal team, an attorney. His book is The Verdict. He also has Blood, Money, and Power, which is available at Amazon or Amazon Kindle. How LBJ Killed JFK. So, Barr, what you have then is motivation for sure. You've got the means. How did he pull it off?
Well, yeah, you do have all the means and everything that you need in a criminal case. What he did was use Mac Wallace. Now, he's the fellow we found the fingerprint match for on the 6th floor at the sniper's nest. That's plural, snipers. We could then tie him into and have, no question about it, that Oswald was there too, but he apparently was what he said he was. He had left it and was downstairs during the shooting.
Right, he said he was a patsy.
Right. And he was a patsy, and there are several examples in this upcoming book of how other men were patsies for Johnson. I mean, he set it up in several different ways, including my law partner, Ed Clark. But the big question I had when the first book came out was who else was there? And we had some pretty good suspects. By we, I was working with several well-known researchers, and we couldn't be for sure. But since that book came out, many people have contacted me. It's been delayed in getting out just because so many new people have come in with new evidence. strong evidence. But one of them was an attorney for Estes who was also with the Army and had close ties with the intelligence community, and he could name 2 more people who were likely involved. And what I'm doing right now to finish up the book and get it out there is using what I can with these men who claim to be or somehow seem to be involved as other shooters to prove up what they could prove, what they could show. Because obviously if they're there, they're going to add very important evidence. And that is still being corroborated. The book is going to final by the middle of next month, and in that time frame, it's going to be proven up. But what it looks like and what's coming out is that the CIA was there, and the CIA has been identified as being involved through another fellow who came to talk to me about the case, a guy named Jack Worthington, who had been told by his mother that John Kennedy was his father. Now, he looked into that but dropped it. It was too touchy a subject with the Kennedys. He's not interested in that. What he did have, though, was a tie-in back in Texas with a fellow who had been a roommate with Johnson when they were in college and who had done all kinds of favors for Johnson since then. And his gang, his team at a bank in a small town called Eagle Pass, which was also known as the Smuggler's Hole, had people working with him who were with the Mafia, with the CIA, and he had George de Mohrenschildt visiting there. And, of course, that brings in Oswald. I mean, the whole gang was down there with as close ties they had to Mexico, so close a ties that this fellow named Robert Bibb was able to, well, he arranged the honeymoon for the Kennedys. They went to Acapulco, and I mean, the guy was in everything for Johnson, helping Johnson wherever he could. But the big point that came out of it all with Jack was Worthington was being able to tell me how the CIA was involved, rogue CIA agents, ones that are barely on the radar even after all these years, and who are probably going to, show up when what you talked about at the beginning of the program is finished. That is when we get this evidence out. We know where it is. It's a very important thing to do, but it's got three people are involved.
Just, I mean, right off the top of my head here, why has it taken so long for these people, these shadowy CIA rogue agents, as you say? Why has it taken so long for them to come forward? And what about Worthington? Is he still around? Is he a son of John Kennedy? I mean, what's the deal with him?
Well, yeah, he is. I've met him. I'm convinced he was. He approached the Kennedys looking for DNA. They didn't want to do it. He dropped it. I mean, it's a murky issue, but I'm bringing it out in the book. But he dropped it. He's not interested in that. He's convinced, and he's pleased with what he's done. But he's also was concerned about his family on his mother's side. That's where the Bibbs come in, and he wanted to bring that out. And yes, he's still around, and I have a contract with him. We have a working agreement to get his book out.
I have to tell you, I just did a Google on him, and I'm looking at pictures of him. He sure does look like a Kennedy.
I tell you, that's what happened
just
to me.
The physical resemblance. I mean, he looks like young Joe Kennedy. All right, we'll be right back. Book that will be coming out in a month or two, and we'll follow up then as well, that being The Verdict, where he brings out evidence that Lyndon Johnson was deeply involved in the conspiracy to kill Kennedy in 1963. Barr, I'm looking again at Jack Worthington. I mean, he looks like Kennedy's son, but he also, it's been written about heavily. Vanity Fair has been published, his accusation, that is. He was involved with, his mother was in the Bibb family, which was very connected to LBJ in Texas. And he seems to be someone who's connected to all of this stuff. Please explain. It's very complicated, so please explain the connection there and how this sheds light on the case.
Well, it is very complicated, and the big input I get from Jack is how his family was working with these rogue CIA agents it is a very deeply involved thing going back in history to his grandfather, who was one of Teddy's Rough Riders, which took him to Cuba and set him up with the Deere tractor program, exporting Deere tractors into Cuba over many years. And, of course, when Cuba went Castro, Bibb was there ready to help out with arms and weapons that were needed for the up to the Bay of Pigs. It was this kind of connection, and it kept on going. And they were bringing in drugs, too, which is another CIA trait. They like to, deal in drugs because they make more money. That all came out in a court trial in New Orleans. Well, it really wasn't a trial, but they brought charges against the CIA and mafia members.
Was this the Garrison case?
No, it wasn't the Garrison case.
Not Garrison.
No, this was later, and it was a cleanup sort of case after Johnson was out of office. They were represented by my partner, Ed Clark, and it was a plea case. And nothing was really produced, but the names are there, and they all tie into CIA and mafia. The point here is these cases, these participations, these conspiracies are well hidden. I mean, they are so far off of the radar that you can't really dig them up, especially when the CIA is lying about it. It takes, again, like I say, an insider who can pinpoint these people and bring them out and weave the web, so to speak, to tell you what had happened. And this is what Jack has been able to do. You got to understand, he was out of the country for many years as an international trader. I mean, he was there when China Steel went public. He was there on a number of other big transactions with the Tigers over there, the Southeast Tigers, and the companies there that were really making progress. And he really didn't know about this until his father was on his deathbed and his mother told him, and he was so concerned for his children, for a genetic connection, that he had to find the answers. And then it comes back to, once you've been told this, you got to find out who your father really is. And a lot was done to dig up that information. But he's got to be...
The business of the... Yeah, I mean, I think that there's... You could just tell by looking at it. But the business of the CIA mafia connection, I mean, that goes back to World War II. I mean, it was the Roosevelt administration that basically hired Lucky Luciano to help with the Italian war front. And the mob began working with the OSS, which was the predecessor to the CIA. The relationship continued in the 1950s with the Dulles brothers using, CIA connections in places like Guatemala and, in some of their quiet coups. And then, President Eisenhower warned about this, perhaps, when he mentioned the military-industrial complex, of which he was probably a part. Truman had mob connections. It's not new. Anyway, we'll get on a break here. We'll be right back. We're talking about some of the background that led to the assassination of JFK. This is an important subject for today because it brings up issues of whether or not this infrastructure is still in place. Your contention being that Lyndon Johnson was involved in it, that he played a role in it, that he possibly was the main point person in it. He certainly had the most to gain. But we're talking about some of the background with regard to the rogue CIA / mafia connection, how that played a role in the Bay of Pigs attempt to liberate Cuba from the communist dictator, that Kennedy... he kind of waffled on that one, lost his nerve in the middle of it. There was some anger around that. I don't know if that played a role. Some of the same people that were involved in that, including E. Howard Hunt and some of the CIA operatives, showed up later at the Watergate break-in. There's a question of whether or not they were trying to or played a role in the pushing Nixon out of power. But going to the Kennedy deal, Barr, what is the connection between this rogue CIA mafia infrastructure and LBJ?
Well, it's a strong connection through a family friend who would do anything for him, and it brings it out onto the crime scene itself. Now, whatever you do in looking at the assassination, you've got to get the crime scene down pat. It is well defined. I'm afraid that even a margin of a micrometer will make a difference in the results, and we just don't have that solid evidence. But I was able to bring in the fingerprints. You can bring in the identification of the people who were likely there, and you can find people from the outside who are able to bring in additional leads, which in turn lead to the people themselves. The suspects we have now through the CIA are well established. My quest, my purpose right now is to find out what these guys who claim to have been there know and see if they fit in with what we know the crime scene is.
JFK, so LBJ is, is obviously plotting this. He sees it as his only way to achieve the presidency, especially as there's more than rumors that he's going to be knocked off the ticket, that certainly Bobby Kennedy hates him and is demanding that he be dumped. And it looks like that's exactly where things are going. So he decides to act. Now, talk a little bit about that. I mean, just as a sidebar question also, and I don't know if you might reflect on this. How could John F. Kennedy have been so careless as to ride down a street in Dallas in an open limousine like that? I mean, there had already been 2 attempts on his life. They had canceled the trip to Chicago. They had canceled the trip to, I think it was Miami or Tampa, because there were legitimate threats. I mean, what was going on there? I mean, it's like, it looks like he was a sitting duck.
Well, I think John Kennedy was really confident at the time, and he had a great deal of trust in the Secret Service. Going into Dallas that morning, though, he remarked to Jackie that we're going into nut country now. So he knew there was a risk. The decision to leave the cover off of the limousine may not have been his, and he may have just accepted the fact that it wasn't there when he got into it. That was done and been traced back to several people with the Johnson camp. But I think it was confidence that John Kennedy had that he would be okay. I mean, he put a great deal of trust in the government. If you look at it from an existential standpoint, he really believed that he was safe because he did believe in the government. He made the mistake.
Well, he must have, because, I mean, the pictures of him as he moves down the motorcade there, he looks like he's got not a trouble in the world. I mean, he's smiling and waving. It's as if, nothing is going on. Where exactly was LBJ during all of this anyway?
Well, he was 2 cars behind and apparently using a phone, and I haven't gotten all the details on this. And as I've said, you've got to be specific, but he was apparently on the phone. There is a photograph that shows he may have ducked just before the shots were fired. The first shot was fired, and then he was covered by Secret Service agent Youngblood to protect him, which again is...
Was he also in an open limousine, or was he... an open limousine, an open car,
yeah,
or... Yeah.
It was open, yes, he was open. So he had reason to be worried that the shots may not go as planned. Because the guy they knew, this guy Oswald, was far from being a marksman or any kind of a shooter. He was one step above being dropped out of the military because his low grades on shooting. But Johnson was there keeping track of what was going on supposedly, but no one ever questioned Johnson about what he was doing. They took an affidavit from him. No, it wasn't even an affidavit. They took a statement from him, and that was that. And it goes back to how the cover-up got going right from the start. because when the Warren Commission met, one of the members came in and said, the United States is not a banana republic. The implication was that the government couldn't have been involved. We're not going to look at the government. What they didn't know, and what my book brought out, was that in Texas, it was a banana republic. And when the crime is in Texas, you can control it and keep it undercover as best you can and protect the president on the theory that, we can't implicate a president of the United States. Now, he can kill a president of the United States, but we can't implicate him. I mean, it was so wrong, everything that went down with the Warren Commission. They had no proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I'll assure you of that.
Now, Texas at that time also had some pretty serious corruption. I mean, you had the drug scandal in Houston in the 1950s. There was mafia, shipments of drugs coming in Galveston. I mean, there was some pretty big problems there. So, you already had a pretty strong foothold with regard to mobsters and corrupt government officials. LBJ being kind of almost the top of the heap in that regard. LBJ obviously put on the ticket for Kennedy because he promised to deliver votes in Texas in the same way as he had delivered the votes for himself, especially when he ran against Stevenson, and which I think has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he stole that election. I even think his biographer, who's very sympathetic, that being Robert Caro, acknowledges that. All right, we're going to take another break. We'll be right back. Texas, and how did that contribute to the assassination?
Well, with all of this, and you were saying there were many problems in Texas, but more specifically, there were many problems for Johnson. He had been allied and working with a fellow named Billy Saul Estes on federal money, and Johnson takes a commission on anytime he helps someone, 10 to 20%.
Right.
And Johnson found out, or Johnson learned that Estes was being investigated. And during inaugural week, there was a meeting at Johnson's home in Dallas, in Washington, and they talked about how they had to do something about this investigation that was going on. 6 months later, the chief investigator is killed, murdered, a vicious murder. It later comes out that it was done by Mac Wallace, the fellow I mentioned earlier, whose fingerprint we could match to the 6th floor, and it was a ruling of suicide. This is because of Ed Clark running the state of Texas. And he was recognized as the boss of Texas by the Reader's Digest, among others. But in my book, I could show how he could run the state of Texas and control it. And he could do it through his control of the judges in Travis County, Austin, Texas, because every major case in the state involving the government would run through Austin. It was just the way it was set up. If you had a problem with oil or whatever.
Was your boss, your former boss Clark, implicated in the assassination, according to you?
Yes, and I say that because I worked with him. We were partners. First of all, I was told by one of his partners that if the truth be told, Clark arranged the assassination. At the time, I couldn't believe it, but the longer I was there, I found out that was true. And where I really got involved in it was when Clark had to get his bonus, and he had lost it because Johnson dropped out of running again in 1968, was it? No, 19,
Right,
and there I go.
All right, we got another break here. We'll be back. Thank you very much. Hour number 2 of Chuck Moore Speaks here at the USA Radio Networks. Monday through Friday, 10 till noon. You're welcome to join the program. 844-439-1391. 844-439-1391. My guest, who's been gracious enough to stay on for the second hour for a period, is Barr McClellan. He is the author of The Verdict, How LBJ Killed JFK. This book exposes a secret high-level conspiracy in Texas that led to President John F. Kennedy's death and the succession of Lyndon B. Johnson as President of the United States in 1963. Attorney Barr McClellan, a former member of LBJ's legal team, uses hundreds of newly released documents, including insider interviews, court papers, and the Warren Commission, to illuminate the maneuvers, payoffs, and power plays that revolved around the assassination of Kennedy and the exposure of LBJ's involvement in the murder plot. Barr, we were talking in the first hour about the conditions around the crime scene. Why did the Warren Commission engage in such a high-level cover-up? Why did they insist on the single man theory, the lone wolf, the single bullet? I mean, I don't think that there's a question that Oswald wasn't involved, but recent evidence, increasing evidence, indicates that it was a bigger and wider conspiracy. I don't even think that that's a question at this point. I think that the assassination subcommittee, congressional subcommittee in the 1970s, came out with a report stating that. So that's become official government doctrine. So therefore, why did the Warren Commission cover this up?
Well, I think the biggest reason, and it was forecast by one of the members when he said, we are not a banana republic. We're not going to go after the government at all. Part of his reasoning, the reasoning may have been it was the Cold War was going strong. If the Soviet Union were involved, it would be a terrible thing. If it were Cuba involved, it would be a terrible thing, which would lead to another war. They were really intent, I think, on keeping everything back. And they had to look at who the most likely suspect was, and that was Lyndon Johnson. And if they implicated him, it would be a disaster for the nation. This was the thinking, I believe, that motivated them to say, we're not going to look at the government. And they didn't. They did everything they could to try and prove that there was a single lone gun, and they came up all wrong. I mean, like I said earlier, you can look at the evidence, and there is no evidence, not certainly by any reason beyond a reasonable doubt, that points to only Oswald. They just made a big mistake to cover it up, and who knows what kind of motivations they have in individual cases. But we know Ford moved the evidence around. We know they speculated about the single bullet. We know there was no way one man could pull off those shots that quickly. We know Oswald was not a good shot. I mean, he was almost in the bucket, as they put it, in the toilet because of his poor shooting. I mean, the award they gave for his quality was bad. Anyway, all of this was going on.
Right, and also the gun that he used, the rifle he used was a really old, outdated rifle that did not ballistically match the bullet, apparently, and that the single bullet theory, which was the part of the Warren Commission that was written by Gerald Ford, who was a congressman at the time, that's been proven false and admitted as such by the House Assassinations Committee in the 1970s, long after the fact, and I think even Ford himself admitted that, and that Ford was operating, according to what I've read, as an FBI representative on that committee. So the FBI was a part of this, I guess you'd have to say, cover-up. I mean, was J. Edgar Hoover in it? I mean, why did he want to cover it up?
Well, one thing was, it was part of his duty was to protect the president, and he failed miserably because one of his agents didn't make a follow-up call on Oswald. But Hoover was in on this, thinking that we can't implicate the government. We've got to make it one lone nut. And everything you said about it was true. I mean, you were listing the different points that were just wrong with the Warren Commission, and you hit the nail on the head. It was wrong. And nowadays, I think this is accepted, that there was a conspiracy. I mean, a supermajority of Americans know there was a conspiracy. What we've got to do is get all the proof out and make the case about what really happened. And it turns on, you can't ignore Johnson just because he was the president. You can't ignore Johnson because you're ignoring and doing an injustice to John Kennedy. You've got to go and uncover this, and there are steps to do so. I've tried to outline.
Roger, Yeah, and
Go
you
ahead.
do a brilliant job of it. Roger Stone, his new book about Nixon, he says that Nixon wanted to get to the bottom of the Kennedy assassination as president, and that he intended to open the thing up in his second term, and that very well could be part of why he had to resign. That there were people that did not want this thing opened up, and they basically forced him out of office over this. I mean, that's one of his theories.
Well,
do you think?
he's right, and I've talked to Roger Stone some, but I've talked to a fellow named Doug Caddy, who was involved from the beginning with the Watergate break-in, and who represented Billy Saul Estes when he offered to tell all he knew to the Department of Justice, and was going to tell how he killed JFK. But Billy Saul Estes had to shut up because the DA wouldn't give him immunity. So all of this is there. That what Roger Stone has presented is solid material. When I said we've talked, but we have not worked together. I think it's best for the researchers that are in on this that we keep an arm's length to avoid any kind of, well, you're being favoritism or something. I mean, because the critics are out there, and that's where I really found out how mean they can get. I mean, I've been waterboarded, I've been firebombed, and everything else, and it doesn't make any difference. It's coming out. We're going to get the story out there. It's taking some effort, but it's coming out, and it's in the book.
It's coming. It's starting to. Finally, there seems to be a critical mass. I mean, and it's pushing out. Why would the mafia and the CIA? Why would they want Kennedy knocked off? I mean, I get the Johnson connection, but why would they work with Johnson? What did they get out of it?
Well, I think the biggest thing there, and I've tried to bring this out in the book, is there was this atmosphere of real displeasure with John Kennedy, not just because of the Bay of Pigs, but because they knew he was trying to talk to Khrushchev for a treaty of peace and all kinds of steps to set up a world government. This is real speculative in my view, from what I know. But we can get that kind of evidence out here. They were really unhappy that he was going to give up.
I just want to dwell on that a little bit because several people that I've interviewed over the years, including Roger Stone and Jerry Corsi and others, they bring up this element that the certain military figures who might have been connected to the CIA or rogue elements, they were upset at Kennedy because of the Cuban Missile Crisis, that they wanted Kennedy to go out and bomb the Ruskies. I mean, that Kennedy refused to do this. He stood up to them. There was a real shouting match. And he basically came to a deal with Khrushchev, one that led to both Kennedy's and Khrushchev's undoing. But that he went against this a certain element of the government that wanted to go to war with Russia.
That's it. And when Eisenhower identified the military-industrial complex, he was identifying a huge conspiracy. And in their defense, they were concerned about the future of America, but they didn't see the consequences of what they were talking about. And yet they were willing to do, in this case, assist in the cover-up and build this atmosphere that Kennedy had to go. It wasn't that they were involved in assassination, but they were generating this, and it fell over into some of these CIA rogue agents that the House Special Committee identified. And what they did, when they were asked if they wanted to participate, they said yes. But you've really got to understand, this all goes on way off. Again, I said the radar, but I mean, there are no meetings, there are no minutes, there's no videotapes or anything. This is talk, and it's talk that's with signals. A nod can say.
Well, we're doing more than talk. We're taking a look here at some of Kennedy's policies that might have been created a kind of a critical mass of anger at him by various elements who felt that the only way to go forward was to get rid of him. The other element of Kennedy was that you mentioned this idea of like the CIA wanting to be involved in some sort of a world order movement. Kennedy was against that. Kennedy was a nationalist. Kennedy wanted to, he was actually quite conservative. And, in a sense, his assassination led to a really major change in the way this country did business. I mean, that can't be denied. I mean, under Johnson, you had this huge, good, great society, and the whole welfare system was put in place, and you had more changes than at any time since the early years of the New Deal. Kennedy was against all of that. Kennedy was also against escalating the war in Vietnam. Is there not evidence that Kennedy wanted to withdraw the military from Vietnam or reduce it? And within days of his assassination, while his body was still lying in state in the rotunda, Johnson was meeting with military figures at the White House planning to escalate the war in Vietnam. So, I mean, these were all factors. Things really changed on a dime with Kennedy's assassination. And the third thing I'll bring up, and this one gets into some wild and woolly conspiracy thought, and I'm not endorsing it, is that John F. Kennedy authorized in the summer of 1963 the issuance of a great deal of money backed by silver coin. In other words, silver certificates, not through the Federal Reserve. That was stopped within days of Kennedy's assassination. The Federal Reserve once again went back to issuing its own fiat currencies. That's just another story. But the point is there were a lot of interests here, a lot of groups and individuals who felt that their agenda was being held back by the Kennedy administration, and that once Kennedy was out of the picture, those things went forward. There's a sense of that.
There is, and what was going on, and I identify this in my book by referring to a CIA manual on the anatomy of a revolution, where they're pointing out what things are going on that stir up this unhappiness. And don't forget, school busing and integration was going on, and that had a lot of people unhappy. The economy was not that strong. Well,
that didn't happen until I don't think that happened until the 1970s. In fact, I'm here in Boston. I remember that.
No. I'm saying it started with the Brown decision, and they were moving in court.
Oh, sure.
And there was a lot going on. But a lot of people were unhappy with a lot of things.
Well, Kennedy is identifiable is that there was a major change in the way we are governed after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. In a sense, he was the last truly conservative president. He was not somebody who played the game with the establishment. He was a maverick. He was a free thinker. He went his own way. He actually believed that as president, he had executive power. He didn't. He wasn't anyone's person. I mean, he was very I sense. And whereas LBJ was a creature of this establishment, I mean, he went ahead and advanced all of their agenda. I can't help but think that, in a broader sense, that has a lot to do with this.
No, it does, and you're absolutely right about John Kennedy, which is why I admire him so much. Still admire him. I mean, he was a really great president. In fact, he's recommended as one of the three great people of the 20th century. He did the job, and he did it right, and that's why he had to go. And Lyndon Johnson was out there. He would do anything on commission and mainly protect himself, and he was very good at doing that because he had the legal system in the Banana Republic of Texas all on his side, and you couldn't help but relate back to what was going on in Washington. So, it really was a bad thing because conservative, reasonable policies that John Kennedy was promoting and following, with the assassination, there was a major change. And it evolved over the years. It was later recognized as malfeasance. I mean, unhappiness. A part of it, I believe, was because there was not closure. When someone dies or is killed, you have to go through the process, including penitence and redemption. They didn't do that. And that's what's also in the book. John Jr. wrote a poem on a penitent society because he could feel what had happened. This is still with us. And we need to clear the deck, so to speak, go through the penitence and acknowledge what happened. And the only way we can really do it is, with efforts like you're undertaking right now to bring out the story and getting this evidence out there. And in my book, I recommend 4 steps that we can take to improve, to reverse this, what I call, the corruption is so accepted, it's become banal. Okay, so the government's corrupt, so what? Everybody lets it go on. That has to end. And there are important steps that we can take to do just that. And I've tried to identify them, and we'll be promoting them over the next few months. Fortunately, from my experience in Washington as a registered lobbyist, I can plot a plan, so to speak, put my own plot in work to get some legislation out that we need that will focus this issue and I hope bring closure, which is part of what we need to do. Mainly we need to just straighten out the government because everybody knows, and I mean, it's just corruption. So what? We accept it. And one of the ones I love.
No, look, I mean, I've been fascinated by this topic since it happened in 1963. I was just a kid at the time. But, as somebody who does media, as an author, as a radio host, as a TV host, I have put a lot of time into this as well for the very reason you're mentioning. I mean, there is a sense of wanting to achieve closure so we can have penitence. But in order to get there, we have to identify the problem. There was a lot of very lofty things said right after the JFK assassination that we're all to blame and that, after all, I mean, the Rolling Stones had a line, after all, it is you and me. That's nonsense.
Right.
There are people that did this. The American people are not to blame. The American people maybe are to blame only to the degree that we're apathetic, that we haven't stood up and said we want to right the ship of state by identifying the nature of this corruption so that we can not only put the issue to rest and so that JFK's soul can rest in peace, but so that we can make sure it doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
It's a matter of the reason the Founding Fathers recognized the right to free media, to free press, to free speech. It wasn't so you could say the F word or the S word. It was so that you can investigate corruption and say it in an atmosphere and identify it in an atmosphere that is not fearful. So, what we're trying to get at here is exactly what this was about. Thanks so much. Barr McClellan's my guest. Barr, you say that you have 4 principles toward getting to the truth, toward penitence, as you say. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, what are those principles?
Well, 4 basic principles I think we're seeing missing from government. One is, and it all comes back to what John Kennedy said, ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country's service. And we need, and this is the top of the list, we can't lie to the government. That's a federal law. We need a law that the government can't lie to us. And any government employee doing it is in trouble. We also need them to adopt the idea of service, that is the way they're going to make their living, and they're not going to make it by trying to unjustly enrich themselves however they would like to. Closure. I mean, openness. We have to avoid hiding things. They have to be open with us. The government does. And finally, being as it is a matter of service, they've got to really focus on what they can do for their country and not what it can do for them. And there are laws that can be passed. There's some in effect now, but we need to restate them and make them tough. And I've written up what I call a code for JFK, really, that will take these fundamental principles of government and try and cut out the corruption that's there. Any step we can take in that direction is to the good, and I'm hoping, and it's easy enough to write a piece of legislation, to get it into the Congress, so they will be considering it over the next session, next term here, next 2 years. That's one thing I think we can do. The other thing is there is so much evidence, and we know where it is, that they won't expose. And what we can bring is a complaint back to law enforcement and ask them, tell them they have a fundamental duty to serve the person who suffered the most, in this case, the Kennedy family. And until the Kennedy family has its answers, they need to keep going. I mean, they can drop out for any other reason, and they do, but this one is basic to law enforcement, and it's brought out by Clint Peoples, who was a U.S. Marshal, and he went after it in a big way and got Billy Saul Estes exonerated, really. This kind of thing has to be done, and a complaint is one way to do it. You mentioned earlier how the Kennedys have been in the background. They've stayed in the background.
Right.
Jackie, it became pretty clear, was scared for her children, which was a very good reason, knowing the extent of the cover-up. And now, though, several Kennedy members, like I mentioned, came to me and told me that they endorsed what I have. One of the best ones was the first one, a guy named Wilson Gathings, who was a family member on the Jackie side, and he wrote an email and said, everything in your book is correct. And the unique thing about him was, not only was he a Kennedy on Jackie's side, he was also, his mother had married a Maverick, and that was the family that knew all about the Bibbs in Eagle Pass. So his unique insight was really, really strong. There's just so much, though, that has to be brought out. And the third thing I'd like to see, and I'm going to really push this, is just challenge anybody who wants to come forward and talk about this.
Which has all sorts of new information in it about Kennedy assassination. Barr, when you say that Kennedy family members have cooperated with you and have endorsed your work, has that been the case with any of the so-called official Kennedy people? You know, like the people that run the Kennedy Library, like Joe Kennedy Jr. over here in my neighborhood in Boston, like the young Joe Kennedy who is now congressman, any of those types?
No, and here's one reason. Let me tell you who I have heard from. Wilson Gathings, of course, was the first. Then there's a Kathleen McCarthy who was related to Joe, and she's the historian for the family, and she gave me a lot of good information and support. When Megazani, who had dated John Jr., I mentioned earlier, got hold of me, she sent a copy of her letter asking me to help her to Caroline, and that was 10 years ago, and they've stayed with me ever since. In fact, Meg talked to Caroline, and Caroline said that she wasn't going to take any position, but that she could go ahead with her story, that is Meg's story, which was how big oil was involved, which was as far as she could take it before she wanted to get it out on John Jr.'s death, which she did. I heard Bobby Kennedy Jr., I guess, or the third, is saying now that he believed there was a conspiracy. Caroline is staying in the background, but it is such a delicate issue that to try and talk to them, it's got to be handled with great care. I don't know how to do that best. But Ted Kennedy was the one who put the lid on Jack Worthington when he tried to bring out his story, which wasn't supposed to even be brought out unless he got the DNA. But anyway, these are the family members, and you can't rule out Jack. I mean, Jack has all the traits of John Kennedy once you get to know him and sit down and talk to him.
Right, and I think that probably Ted Kennedy might have done that because, of embarrassment over all the various paternity claims. Kennedy, let's face it, he was a womanizer, and who knows? I mean, it was just keeping a lid on that one. But also, Barr, look, you're taking on the same national security apparatus that Kennedy took on. I mean, at the bottom of the Kennedy assassination, but it opens up a can of worms in terms of the same examination of this corrupt establishment, whatever you want to call it. I like to call it the Eastern Seaboard liberal establishment that basically was responsible for Kennedy's assassination. I recently had the opportunity to interview Professor Michael J. Glennon. He is a professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy here at Tufts, where I am. He's the author of a book called National Security and Double Government. Now, Mr. Glennon is a liberal. He's a part of the same establishment. He worked as a special counsel for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee a couple of years back. And he says that starting in the Truman administration, the national security apparatus in this country, the CIA, the National Security Agency, the NSA, all of these agencies have become so powerful, so secretive, so expensive, so massive, that he refers to it as literally a double government, that basically he calls it the Madisonian government. That's the government that we see visibly, the president, the Congress, the Supreme Court, that they're manipulated by what he calls the Trumanite government, and that's this national security government that actually calls the shots. They determine our foreign policy. They determine how we conduct our affairs. I would expand it beyond his definition and say that the same thing applies in a lot of areas. Healthcare, welfare, education. We could take a look at a lot of areas of life where the government is now run by these private agencies that are not accountable to the people. They're not elected. They're often financed off the books, and they're the ones who make the decisions. And it's this that could be opened up with an examination of the Kennedy assassination, which is at a point in time, it's a pivot in time, where there was a major shift toward a further empowerment of this so-called double government that Professor Michael Glennon talks about. So I think that's what's the resistance here. It's not just the Kennedy assassination. It's an opening up of this whole rotten, secretive level of government that most Americans have no idea exists.
Absolutely right. And there's no question that it can be opened up. And we've seen it over the last 8 years when so many times we've been able to get right to the point, and all of a sudden we hear executive privilege, or we hear that the disks were destroyed, or we hear any kind of excuse that can be invented. We have ways to get at least the contact of the government with business, and it's really big business, which, by the way, I bring out in my book when I go through how the bonus was calculated through the King Ranch and Murchison, who you mentioned earlier, and the Rockefellers, Exxon, all these big companies. They're all there. And the thing is, it can be identified by requiring disclosure, if not by the powers that be, so to speak, but by the people they deal with in the government. And that's when I mentioned earlier the code, that we want these things disclosed, and we've got to have impartiality. That's the best word with government, that they can't favor one over the other. They've got to look at serving their country.
Yeah, I mean, we can appeal to patriotism. We can appeal to just the use of media as a way to create a critical mass by bringing these things out publicly over and over again, by operating as sort of a counter-Fabian approach, gradually increasing the power of information and the power of truth as a way to counter this secretive, encroaching level of government, which wants nothing but creating a falseness. I mean, you say that Kennedy talked about getting at truths. He talked about ask not what the country can do for you, what you could do for the country. I mean, bring the ship of state to a truthful place.